Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cozy English Corner, where learning English is easy, cozy, and fun. I'm Mia.
And I'm Jack. We're really happy you're here today. Whether you're making breakfast, driving to work, or simply relaxing with a cup of coffee, thanks for joining us.
Jack, can I ask you something?
You can always ask. Whether I'll answer, that's a different question.
Fair enough. So here's my question. What's the most embarrassing mistake you've made recently?
Actually, it happened about 3 days ago.
What happened?
I was texting one of my friends after work. It had been a really long day, so I wrote, "I can't wait for the weekend." Then I added, "I'm completely exhausted." And finally, "I don't think I can survive another meeting today." I looked at the message, thought, "Perfect," and pressed send.
Everything sounds normal so far.
It was, until I looked at the name at the top of the screen. I hadn't sent it to my friend. I'd sent it to my manager.
Oh no. That's one of those moments when your heart just stops for a second.
Exactly. For about 5 seconds, I simply stared at my phone. Then I started imagining everything that could possibly go wrong. I couldn't stop thinking about it.
Oh, I like that expression. Couldn't stop thinking about it. You'll hear native speakers use it all the time. If you can't stop thinking about something, it means the thought stays in your mind again and again. For example, I couldn't stop thinking about that film. Or, she couldn't stop thinking about her interview. It's a really natural expression to use in everyday English.
That's exactly how I felt. I couldn't stop thinking about that message. While I was making coffee, I was thinking about it. During another meeting, I was thinking about it. Even walking home, I was still thinking about it.
So, the message only took a few seconds to write, but you spent hours thinking about it.
The funny thing is, nothing bad had actually happened. My manager hadn't even replied. But in my head, I'd already imagined 10 different conversations. None of them ended well.
I think that's something almost everyone has experienced. One small mistake, and suddenly it feels much bigger than it really is.
Exactly. And it made me wonder, why do tiny mistakes stay in our minds for so long when everyone else usually forgets them so quickly?
That's a great question. Because I don't think today's conversation is really about one text message.
No, I think it's about something we've all experienced. Making one small mistake and carrying it around much longer than we should.
You know, there's something interesting about your story. The mistake itself only lasted a few seconds, but you kept thinking about it for hours.
That's true. The message was over in 10 seconds. The worrying lasted the rest of the afternoon.
And nothing bad had even happened yet.
Exactly. My manager hadn't replied, nobody had complained, nothing had changed. Everything was happening inside my own head.
What were you thinking?
Oh, all kinds of things. He's going to think I'm lazy. The next meeting will be awkward. Why didn't I check the name before I pressed send? I was completely overthinking it.
Overthinking. That's another really useful word. If you overthink something, you think about it too much. Usually much more than you need to. For example, don't overthink your English. Or, I always overthink before an important interview. It's a word you'll hear a lot in everyday conversations.
That's exactly what I was doing. I wasn't solving the problem. I was just overthinking it.
Can I ask you something? If your best friend had accidentally sent that message, what would you have said?
I'd laugh. Then I'd say, "Don't worry, these things happen."
Isn't that interesting? We're often much kinder to other people than we are to ourselves.
You're right. I never said, "It's okay, Jack." Instead, I thought, "How could you be so careless?" I really started to beat myself up.
Oh, beat yourself up. That's a fantastic English expression. If you beat yourself up, you keep criticizing yourself after making a mistake. For example, don't beat yourself up. Everyone makes mistakes. Or, she kept beating herself up after the presentation. Native speakers use this expression all the time.
I can see why. I spent nearly an hour beating myself up, and nothing had actually happened.
Our minds can be very dramatic sometimes.
Mine definitely was. It was like watching a disaster movie, except I was the only person in the cinema.
That's a great way to describe it. And I think social media makes this even worse. We open our phones and see everyone's best moments. The promotion, the holiday, the perfect photo, the success.
But nobody posts, "Today I sent a message to the wrong person."
Exactly. So we quietly start believing that everyone else gets through life without making silly mistakes.
When the truth is, they probably made one this morning. We just don't know about it.
Maybe that's the real problem. It's not that we make mistakes, it's that we believe we're the only ones making them.
And if that's true, maybe mistakes aren't the real enemy. Maybe it's the way we react to them.
I like that thought. Because what if a mistake isn't just something embarrassing? What if it's also a chance to learn something?
You know, when you said maybe mistakes are a chance to learn something, my first thought was maybe. But mistakes don't usually feel helpful. They usually feel embarrassing.
I completely agree. Nobody enjoys making mistakes. But let me ask you something. How did you learn to ride a bicycle?
Very slowly, and with quite a few falls.
Exactly. Did anyone expect you to ride perfectly on your first day?
Of course not. Everyone knew I was learning.
That's interesting, isn't it? When children make mistakes, we smile and say, they're learning. But when adults make mistakes, we often think, I'm terrible at this.
The mistake is exactly the same, but the reaction is completely different.
Exactly. Let's take English as an example. Have you ever used the wrong word in a conversation?
Oh, yes. Years ago, I wanted to tell someone, "I'm really excited." Instead, I said, "I'm really exciting."
That's such a common mistake. I'm sure many of our listeners have made it too.
The other person laughed and said, "I'm sure you are." I felt so embarrassed. But here's the funny thing. I've never made that mistake again.
Exactly, because you learned from your mistake. Oh, that's another expression you'll hear quite often. Learn from your mistakes. It simply means taking something useful from a mistake instead of only feeling bad about it. For example, the best students learn from their mistakes. Or, every mistake teaches you something new. It's a very positive expression.
I really like that, because that mistake taught me the difference between excited and exciting. I remembered it much better than if I'd only read it in a textbook.
Yes, sometimes the mistakes we remember most become the lessons we remember best.
That reminds me of cooking. The first time I tried making homemade pizza, I completely burned it.
Really?
It looked more like a science experiment than a pizza. But the second one was better. The third one was even better. Nobody explained every little detail to me. I simply kept trying.
There's another expression that describes that perfectly. Trial and error. You'll hear native speakers use it quite a lot. Trial and error means learning by trying, making mistakes, changing something, and trying again. For example, learning to cook is mostly trial and error. Or, starting a new business often involves trial and error.
I like that expression because it makes mistakes sound normal. They're not a sign that something is wrong, they're simply part of the process.
Exactly. Learning English is trial and error. Learning to drive is trial and error. Learning to play an instrument is trial and error. Almost every useful skill works that way.
You know, I think I spent too much time trying to avoid mistakes when I should have been trying to learn from them.
That's a big difference, because people who improve the fastest aren't usually the people who never make mistakes. They're the people who keep learning from them.
That makes me wonder, if everyone makes mistakes, why do some people seem to improve so much faster than everyone else?
I think the answer has less to do with talent and much more to do with how they think. Let's talk about that next.
You know, I thought people improved because they were more talented. Now I'm not so sure.
Really? What changed your mind?
I started thinking about the people I've met over the years, the ones who became really good at something, speaking English, playing an instrument, cooking, giving presentations. Most of them weren't perfect at the beginning. They simply kept going.
I think that's true. Let's imagine two English learners. One person waits until every sentence is perfect before speaking. The other person starts talking straight away. They make grammar mistakes, they forget words. Sometimes they even laugh at themselves. Who do you think speaks more confidently 6 months later?
The second person. Not because they're smarter, because they've had hundreds of chances to improve.
Every conversation teaches them something, even the difficult ones.
That reminds me of my first guitar lesson. I played the wrong chord again and again and again. Eventually, I looked at my teacher and said, "Maybe I'm just bad at this." She smiled and said, "No, Jack, you're just new at this." I still remember those words.
I love that. Sometimes we confuse being new with being bad.
Exactly. Then she gave me some really helpful feedback.
Oh, feedback. That's a very useful English word. Feedback is advice or information that helps you improve. For example, my teacher gave me helpful feedback on my writing. Or, can I get some feedback on my presentation? You'll hear this word a lot at work, at school, and when you're learning something new.
That's exactly what she gave me. She didn't tell me I was hopeless. She simply showed me how to hold my hand differently. 5 minutes later, the chord sounded much better.
Good feedback doesn't make you feel worse. It helps you become better.
Exactly. Looking back, I think I used to see every mistake as proof that I wasn't good enough. Now I see it as feedback. It tells me what I should practice next.
I like that way of thinking. And here's another useful word: setback. A setback is a problem or difficulty that slows your progress for a while. For example, failing the test was only a small setback. Or, every successful person has experienced setbacks. It's a very common word in books, podcasts, and everyday English.
That's interesting, because sending that message to my manager felt like a huge disaster. But looking back, it was really just a tiny setback. Actually, I'm not even sure it was a setback. It was simply an embarrassing moment.
Exactly. Sometimes we give little problems very dramatic names.
That's true. In my head, I'd already lost my job. In real life, my manager probably spent 5 seconds reading the message.
And here's one last expression before we finish your story. Move forward. If you move forward, you continue instead of staying stuck in the past. For example, we learned from the mistake and moved forward. Or, it's time to move forward. I really like that expression.
Me too, because that's exactly what learning is. You make a mistake, you get some feedback, maybe you have a small setback. Then, you move forward, not backwards.
I think that's the biggest difference between people who keep improving and people who stay stuck. They don't avoid mistakes. They simply don't stop because of them.
Speaking of mistakes, I think it's finally time to tell everyone how my manager actually replied to that message.
I've been waiting for that since the first 5 minutes. All right, I think we've made our listeners wait long enough. What happened? Did your manager ever reply?
He did. About 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen, took a very deep breath, and opened the message.
And?
It said, "No worries, Jack. I know those days. See you tomorrow." That was it. One short message. Nothing dramatic.
Seriously? After everything you imagined?
Exactly. I'd imagined awkward meetings, strange conversations, maybe even losing my job. My manager spent about 5 seconds reading the message and then carried on with his day.
That's such an interesting difference. The mistake lasted a few seconds, but the worrying lasted much longer.
Exactly. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I overthought every little detail, and I spent an hour beating myself up for something my manager had already forgotten.
You really couldn't stop thinking about it. You were overthinking it. You were beating yourself up. And your manager had already moved on.
You're right. I think he moved on before I even finished making my coffee.
Yes, sometimes we're the only person still carrying the mistake. Everyone else has already continued with their day.
That made me realize something. The biggest problem wasn't the message. It was the story I kept telling myself after I sent it.
What do you mean?
The facts were actually very simple. I sent a message to the wrong person, he understood, everything was fine. But then my imagination added a completely different story. He's disappointed. He'll never trust me again. Everyone will find out. None of those things actually happened.
I think that's something we all do sometimes. One small mistake, and suddenly our imagination writes a whole novel.
A very dramatic novel.
Exactly. You know, there's one expression we haven't used for a little while. Move on. We explained it earlier. Now listen to how naturally it fits here. Your manager read the message, smiled, and moved on. You were the only person who hadn't moved on yet.
That's true. And I think that's the lesson I'll remember. Every mistake deserves a lesson, not a whole day of worrying. Learn from it, accept the feedback, then move forward.
I really like that, because mistakes don't have to disappear to stop controlling us. Sometimes we simply decide, I've learned what I needed to learn.
Exactly. I still make mistakes. Everyone does. The difference now is I don't give them so much space in my mind. I learn what I can, and then I let them go.
I think that's a beautiful place to finish today's story. Before we say goodbye, let's quickly look back at some of today's useful English.
Good idea. One of my favorite parts of every episode.
Mine too. Let's start with our first expression. Can't stop thinking about. If you can't stop thinking about something, it stays in your mind all the time. For example, I couldn't stop thinking about that book.
And in today's story, I couldn't stop thinking about that text message. Probably much longer than I needed to.
Next, overthink. If you overthink something, you spend too much time worrying or analyzing it. For example, don't overthink your English. Or, I always overthink before an interview.
I definitely overthought that message. The message wasn't the problem anymore. My imagination was.
Number 3, beat yourself up. This is a really common expression. If you beat yourself up, you're too hard on yourself after making a mistake. For example, don't beat yourself up. Everyone makes mistakes.
That's exactly what I did. I spent an hour beating myself up, when I could have simply learned from the mistake.
Speaking of that, our next expression is learn from your mistakes. Instead of asking, why did this happen? Ask, what can this teach me? For example, the best athletes learn from their mistakes.
That's probably my biggest lesson from today. Check the person's name before pressing send. Then, learn from the mistake and don't repeat it.
Next is trial and error. You'll hear this expression quite often. It means learning by trying different things, making mistakes, and improving each time. For example, learning to cook is mostly trial and error.
I think learning English is trial and error too. You try, you make mistakes, you improve. That's completely normal.
And finally, one of my favorite expressions from today. Move on. If you move on, you stop thinking about something and continue with your life. For example, it was only a small mistake. Just move on. Or, she apologized and moved on.
I think that's exactly what my manager did. He read the message, smiled, and moved on. I was the only one still thinking about it.
Before we go, here's a question for you. What's one mistake that taught you something valuable? Tell us in the comments. We'd really love to hear your story.
And if you enjoyed today's cozy conversation, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Cozy English Corner. Every week, we help you improve your English through relaxed, real-life conversations.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Keep learning, be kind to yourself, and remember, everyone makes mistakes.
The important thing isn't avoiding every mistake, it's learning from them and moving on.
See you next time, and stay cozy.